My player from whom I'm declaring my independence this year of our Lord 2025 is Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. I am ready to move on. Now, you talk about Tyreek Hill last year, the wide receiver 1 overall in ADP, the number 2 player overall in ADP last year. He was my first round pick in my home league, which may, I will admit, may tie into my frustration here and my take on things. But it made sense last year. It made sense to take him like that. 2023, he had career high in receptions, career high in targets, career high in yards, career high in fantasy points. He led all wide receivers in touchdowns. It looked great. Same offense. We all thought, hey, wheels up, let's go. And ouch. Okay. He ended up the year wide receiver 21 overall in half points, scoring. But the 10.5 points per game that he scored was tied for wide receiver 33. He tied with the aforementioned DK Metcalf. And he also tied with Josh Downs. All right. Jacoby Myers actually was basically the equivalent production that you got from Tyreek Hill over the course of the year, actually outscored him in points per game. And Jacoby Myers was drafted as the number 54 wide receiver overall at 145. You could have had him at the 12-13 turn in a 12-round league and gotten the same production you got out of, on average, drafting Tyreek Hill second overall. Josh Downs, I mentioned, he was a wide receiver 67, 182nd overall, and tied for him in points per game. Now, Josh only played 11 games, but still, we didn't get a full season's worth of production out of Tyreek Hill. Now, yeah, some of that was due to the 2 injuries. Some of it's due to Tyler Huntley, having to play some quarterback back there. Some of it was the rise of Jonnu Smith, which is all kind of tied together. We talked about Devon Achane having 87 targets there. Yeah, but Tyreek, he's coming off career lows right now in fantasy points, in touchdowns, and it was the second worst yards per target of his career. You were definitely disappointed with where you took him last year. But when I pair that all together, even if Tua stays healthy all season this season, which is, never a given, he might not be healthy for the rest of this week. Tyreek Hill's a head case, dude. He's had legal troubles. He's got 8 babies with 5 different mamas that we know of. He had this domestic incident with his wife back in April that he eventually was not prosecuted for, but we've seen him, beating up dudes on boat docks and everything else. We heard his postseason comments immediately after the season that he wasn't sure if he wanted to even be in Miami, and they had to have a private meeting with him and tell him that was unacceptable. He's going as wide receiver 15 right now. He's going 25th overall. Honestly, I think he bounces back from last season a bit. I think he sees maybe some of those targets that were going to Jonnu Smith, not all of them. And you can keep him. You can keep him at that price. He's a headache waiting to happen. And if he is that closely tied, if last year was solely about Tua Tagovailoa and having to throw the ball short and quick because they were worried about Tua's health and worried about their backup quarterback, if he's that tied to Tua, I don't think I want any part of that, especially where he's going right now. You can keep Tyreek Hill. I'm declaring my independence.
Well, I mean, that whole offense is super tied to Tua, right? That's the scary part of the offense. Like you said, we talked about it a little bit earlier about, maybe they have more of a floor now with the funneling of the targets heading their way with no Jonnu Smith. But to your point, yes, when you're that tied to Tua, behind that bad of an offensive line with a coach that we think is a good offensive head coach, but after what we saw last year, we have to begin the question, like, well, how does he handle those factors that we just labeled out? And the example we got last year was not fitting. And the other thing with Tyreek Hill is, it was a wrist injury. It wasn't a leg injury. And yet he just seemed much slower. And that could just be age kicking in. So he's also kind of the age cliff too. I laid it out before. He's wide receiver 16. Do I think he has a better shot of being around that range now with the Jonnu Smith move? Sure. Do I think you're drafting him with the idea that you have a top 12 ceiling on your hands? I would say the probability is pretty low on that one, with these just as equal to or greater probability of it falling off a cliff if we have to go back to the backup quarterbacks again in the Miami Dolphins. So I'm with you. I don't disagree. Tyreek Hill's not somebody I'm going to look to target in that range. I'm going to look for guys with more upside.
Adam, are you any more excited about the idea of Tyreek Hill at around that ADP in best ball versus redraft, or are you in on him totally? Are you out on him totally? What's your thoughts here on the cheetah?
Best ball, I think I'd be a little bit more interested, but I think either way, like redraft, I think he's slightly overvalued. I'm not out on him, but I think he'd need to fall a little bit for me to get him. You get close to the wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3 like threshold, then I think pretty interested. But as like a mid tier wide receiver 2, I'm a little bit less. So you get towards the back end of that tier, and I could see myself having Tyreek Hill on a roster, is I guess what I'm saying. So I'm not declaring independence, but I also do think he's a little overvalued, and I think that there's a lot more risk than a reward when it comes to him right now.
Yeah, and just to further my point before we move on here, I mean, last season, even for the fantasy points that he did score, he really only had about 4 or 5, maybe you could argue, games that were actually fantasy useful. The rest of the time, again, he was a replacement level player, scoring 8, 9.5 PPR points a week. Just, I'm ready to move on from that. Plus, I can feel better about myself not drafting him as an upstanding quote unquote citizen.